I would like to take a moment before we get into today's main episode and to talk about my sponsor for the podcast. Podmatch is a new podcasting site dedicated to all podcasters. The platform helps hosts get connected with potential guests to appear on their show, as well as allow guests to find podcasts that will give them a chance to share their story. Podmatch offers many tools to help organize your page, from to-do lists to episode planning to potentially appearing on a leaderboard. Podmatch has it all. The best part, you have the potential to get paid. And who doesn't like to get paid from home? I like to. With an easy sign up, you can start connecting with podcasters and guests immediately. I have been a part of Podmatch since the beginning of May, and I have got to say that it was the best decision I've ever made because Podmatch helps your podcast grow. It helps you get connected with people that have very interesting, very compelling background stories that are just waiting for their story to be shared. So if you are a host or guest and would like to start building professional relationships, explore more opportunities, and have your story shared, I highly suggest that you sign up with Podmatch today by going to joinpodmatch.com/lethal venom to start expanding your network in seconds. I would like to give another huge thank you to Podmatch for sponsoring this episode. Now on to our main episode, and again, you can sign up at joinpodmatch.com/lethal venom to begin your podcasting journey today. Hello everyone, welcome to the Lethal Venom Podcast, the show where I talk about anything I want with the honest to God truth, no lies told. Today I'm joined by Dr. Toni Iezzi. He is a clinical psychologist with over 35 years of experience helping people break free from trauma, stress, and the behavior patterns that keep them stuck. He's also the co-author of Reenactments, Break the Behavior Patterns That Keep You Stuck in Trauma, Stress, and Everyday Life, which is a groundbreaking book that blends science, clinical wisdom, and real-life insight. If you've ever wondered why you repeat the same habits or why even small amounts can trigger big reactions, you're about to find out. So, Dr. Toni, thank you so much for joining us today. I cannot wait to hear this, and I think that a lot of people are going to really appreciate what you have to offer for me today. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me.
So if you could just introduce yourself and tell my audience a little bit about your practice and what you do.
Sure. Given your Alabama background, I should tell you that I went to graduate school, and so did my co-author at the University of Georgia. So spent 6 years there in Athens, a long time ago. And so that was part of my the basis of becoming a clinical psychologist. I had a mentor, and he guided us, and we did a lot of behavior therapy, and one of the first things that I happened at the end of my first year is I spent 3 months in a veterans outreach center in New Orleans. And one reason to mention this is that the obvious thing back then was if someone went to war and they came back, and if they were messed up, of course it was the war experiences. No one's going to argue against that. But having spent a summer interviewing many vets, asking questions about their lives before going overseas, it was pretty obvious that a good number of them were really messed up. These were not the best people to send, the most psychologically strong, and so it was a very difficult situation when a lot of them had experiences with abuse, experiences with the trauma, experiences with parents who had problems of their own, and so and it's important to recognize because this is the foundation of these reenactments that we're going to talk about, and we all kind of get sort of fooled into thinking it's this specific moment, in a given time. And it's usually a big moment, and it doesn't have to be. In terms of what I do here at the hospital, essentially the foot in the door is some medical problem. But almost always that's not the issue that they want to be dealing with. It's usually something else. They're depressed, they're anxious, there's something going on in their lives that affects them a great deal. And um, so I've been doing this for many years, working with, pain patients, cancer patients, cardiac patients, whatever medical condition And these days, the last 5 years, I've been seeing people living with overweight and being considered for bariatric surgery. And again, foot in the door is, I'm overweight and I want surgery. The interesting thing is, it's always a bit of a shock to patients is, I tell them that living with overweight is not the problem. Living with overweight, is a symptom of the problems. And so they get all caught up in what can I do to reduce my weight? What can I do to deal with this? And when really they need to be dealing with issues that have to do with loss or abandonment or threat or unsafety. And these are the themes that set people off. So I started off in my career here doing straight behavior therapy and trauma work. I was well versed in that. And and we would treat people successfully. And then we'd see them a year or 2 or 3 years later, and they'd come in with something else. And they would talk about, oh, an incident at the mall, and I got lit up. My PTSD just lit up, and I can't figure why. It's just there was a minor incident. And so that started to lead to there was something that was being missed when you're just doing general exposure therapy for trauma. And we started to identify themes, and that became more the basis of what we were working on. So I've been doing that for the whole time.
So you've worked with trauma for over 35 years. What has made you realize that there was a bigger pattern beneath people's struggles?
Well, the idea is you get in a car collision, you get injured, this is the moment you focus on. This is what you remember, and this is what triggers and stimulates a great deal of responses. But all of that happens in a background. Everybody has a background, a historical background. Everybody has a story, and to be you know, and everybody has something in the closet that's not great, something that's bad, something that affected them and shaped them, whether it was a parent who had a substance abuse problem or mental health problem, these are the things that lay the groundwork for how they're going to react to trauma. And so it became obvious that it's not just simply the big event, that sets people off.
Why do people often repeat behaviors that they know are harmful, and how do we begin to break those loops?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Reenactments is a specific pattern of the brain, mind, and body to react to a specific experience. Okay. These experiences happen early. All of us, our programming starts early. And um, if some of us have more difficult circumstances, it is going to shape us. It's going to affect how we behave, and it'll continue into adulthood. Even an environment that in which there was no trauma, an environment that even we were cared for well. Sometimes we get instructions that are designed to shape us, sort of like be a good boy, work hard, loyalty to the employer, all these messages that our parents might, with good intentions, give to us. The problem is some of that can be taken too far, so then we go into this perfectionism as an example. And if that's what you get programmed by, and then you become an adult with perfectionism, you know how that goes. We're going to end up in a bad place because no one can be perfect, and it's a hard ideal to live to. So, so these patterns start early. We're not even aware of them. We're not consciously, we just, you know, here's an example. If you have a parent who's not nice, if that parent has called you stupid, from the age 5 to 15, we'll say 500 times. That will program a reaction to any moment that person feels stupid. And they go on. And this is how, again, you come across people, 95 averages come out of an exam and feel like they failed, and they're not smart, and it doesn't matter what their average is. They're never convinced that they're smart because of what they've been told. So they believe those stories and they reenact those stories in everyday life, again, without being aware. And this is why people make the same mistake. So, for example, if you're a kid and you grew up with two aggressive parents, as a kid, your choice is to either act out or go quiet. Let's say it's quiet. I see a lot of that. A person goes quiet. What happens is that response gets programmed to any moment where they feel threatened. So later on in life, an argument with a boss who's giving some criticism, they go quiet. And that's the habit. They don't even know they're doing it. They just feel bad. And then when we'll talk later, maybe in today, is how to break those reenactments. You have to change and create new habits so that you can have different outcomes. Otherwise, it's always the same outcome. So people self-sabotage because they're not aware. No one is sitting there and going, what can I do to screw myself up? That is not how it works. There's a moment, they see it, they react, and they do whatever they have reacted in the manner for most of their lives. And that's why this just keeps getting repeated. And so it's the same, it's the same dysfunctional relationships. It's the same challenges with work. It's the same challenges in dealing with people interpersonally and feeling isolated or abandoned or whatever the theme is. Yeah.
How can someone tell the difference between a normal reaction and a reenactment?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, excuse me, I got a tickle. I ate something that had some spice. Um, let's take an example of cold weather. If you go out into cold weather and you don't have a coat on, you're going to be cold, you're going to be stressed, you're going to have a reaction to that. And then once you're warm, it passes. That is a normal reaction. A reenactment where you were in an accident in November in the middle of a blizzard, and it was freezing. And in that accident, someone passed away. What'll happen is every November you see snow, or it's cold. That will trigger you. And that goes on for hours. And sometimes what we call a PTSD light up, that can go for days and weeks. People don't know it. That's what it is. But they're lit. They've been triggered by this experience. Yeah, so it tends to linger. It's one of those experiences where, like, you know, um, you bump into someone and it's an awkward moment and it's nothing, and it's like that night you're still kind of replaying it. What the hell was that about? What were they trying to insinuate? Why do they look at me that way? And it can go on to the next day. And that hints at something sensitive, something that a theme that someone is sensitive to got triggered, got lit. And that's why this goes on for a while. And with that, it's like I said, it's how you think, how you feel, how you behave. They all go together in a certain way, and it's based on the previous exposures to those kind of moments.
Is there a process where people can that they can do to help lower the chances of having reenactments?
Yeah, yeah. The first thing is you have to be aware. You have to be aware you're in a moment. You have to be aware something affected you and has you feeling funny, but you're not quite sure what that's about. Okay, so anything that increases awareness to moments, to feelings, to experiences is the start to make change. Typical things, my favorite thing is to have people journal. I tell patients, you know, get a journal and document, any incident that happens in the past week. So they come back, and they go, okay, I had an argument with my partner, and he looked at me in a certain way, and then I expressed this, and what was the argument about? Well, I got upset. The partner is a mechanic, and he washed his hands and he used a towel, the fancy towel in the bathroom that is just there for good looks. But he, let's say, he used this. This is a real story, and so there's an argument about towels, but it's not about towels. In her case, it was about the disrespect, the not being listened to. It represented these things. So any incident, however minor or big, we document, and you do what we call a W5. Who is this with? When was this? Where was it? What happened? And most importantly, why? Why did it trigger you? And most people on their own don't know this, but with some practice, then they start to understand. They go through a list of themes, and then they start to recognize the things that they're sensitive to, and then they can start to do something about it. But awareness is the first thing. You can do awareness with journaling. You can do meditation. You could do any creative art, painting or music, whatever medium that helps you be more in touch with yourself is a way to go. Okay. And the more strategies, the better, because this way, if one thing doesn't quite get at something, something else might. But all these strategies sort of get you to look at things. The other obvious thing is seeing a therapist. If you see a therapist, that person is going to help you become aware of some of your issues, become aware of what triggers you, and then you could start to work with that with some guidance. And I think that's what the book is intended to, is to kind of guide people in general in terms of how to deal with all this.
Is there a difference between reenactment and overreacting?
Over, yeah, that's a good overreacting is that's interesting. I never thought of it. That's a good question. The overreacting would be a reenactment by its nature. If you're reacting out of proportion to something, that would suggest something got triggered. Something that you're sensitive to was set off and led to the reaction. That's why we call it an overreaction. If we have a reaction that most people agree with, then that's to be expected. You know, um, if someone's 10 minutes late for a meeting, most people will fluff that off. Some other people might get very upset. And when that person shows up, why were you late? What are you doing? This is making me feel you don't care. This is irritating. This bothersome. That'll look like an overreaction to that person. But the fact of the matter is, if you start to ask that person why they got upset, you'll find out that, this happens to me a lot, where people don't take me seriously. It makes me feel like they don't see me or hear me or value me, and when I don't feel valued, oh, I get upset. And so once you understand the why, then this makes sense, so it, it, it's semantics, but they're similar. An overreaction is like a reenactment. It's different from what's a normal reaction versus a reenactment. Like it goes away, but even an overreaction will linger with you. It'll stay.
You're right about that doing leads to being. Why is action more powerful than just changing your thoughts?
Yeah, this is 35 years of clinical work. This is years of the history of behavior and cognitive behavior therapy before all of that. And um, thinking alone, changing thinking alone, that doesn't necessarily lead to change in behavior. You have to change a behavior in order to feel differently. So do something different, feel different. So you can stand in front of a mirror and say, you know, I'm a good person. And you can do this all day long doing affirmations. Will that mean you're a good person? Will that translate into being a good person? We don't know. So if you focus on behavior, all right, if I volunteer, that is indicative of I'm a good person. If I am helpful to my parents or helpful to my friends, you engage in actions, then these are the indicators of um, you know, I'm beautiful. You can say that all you want. How are you going to feel beautiful? You have to do something. I think the other example is confidence. How do you become confident? You think your way towards confidence and then do something. You have to do something. And And if you do it, okay, you'll feel a little better, and then it'll help the next time. So action is really what it's where it's at. If you're looking to break reenactments, if you're looking to change from old habits to new habits, you have to do something. So you can say all the positive things about losing weight, but if you're not working out, if you're not dieting, if you're not doing all the things that go with that, then it's not going to happen.
Tell me about the reenactment decision matrix and how does it help people respond differently in the moment?
So think of it like a box, 4 squares, and you have awareness on the y-axis, and you have action. Sorry, the other way around. You have action and awareness. Essentially, the more aware you are, the more you can commit to an action that breaks the reenactment. If you're not aware at all in a moment, you're going to do what you've always done. So that person who goes quiet because someone said something to them that wasn't very nice, they will do what's automatic. They're not even aware they're doing it. They just go quiet, trying not to get into more trouble. So in the present, if your reaction to a given situation is the same as in the past, then you're in a reenactment. If in the present you don't do anything at all, you're just passive, you're not engaged, and you're clueless, that is a reenactment. If in the present you do something that's different, if your response to being threatened is to go quiet and you find your voice and express what it is you want or need, that's breaking the reenactment. Sometimes not engaging in any behavior or saying no is breaking the reenactment. Because if you have the habit of always giving in to people and accommodating people, then deciding not to do anything would be breaking the reenactment. So what this does is, once people understand the analysis of this, it helps them to make decisions. It changes how they decide things. So you go from clueless to now going, oh, this is going on. This is what I need to do. Okay, now I know who the enemy is. Now I know what to address. Now I know how to go after what it is that we're after. Key thing, though, is in a trauma context, people recognize a car accident, caused the PTSD, and they treat the reaction to the car accident. But that experience leads to powerlessness, helplessness, dependence, hopelessness. It leads to all these other themes. And if you have lots of experience with those themes, your reaction to this car accident is going to be magnified because of your sensitivity to those themes. So it's those themes that we go and attack. So if you feel not seen and heard, to break the reenactment, what can we do to be seen and heard? Find your voice, assert yourself, write a note, have a meeting. These are all the things that help you. So doing the analysis helps to identify the theme, and then it helps you to come up and think of a strategy that specifically addresses the theme. So for example, bear with me. Let's talk about people living with overweight as an example. If one person is largely overweight because they were abused as a child, would the treatment of that person be the same as a person who lives with overweight because they're in a marriage that sucks? Would it be the same treatment, in terms of living with overweight because they're broke and they're a hair away from ending up homeless, and so eating is just a way to regulate their emotions. Would the treatment be the same for any of those three people? No, each one would target their sensitivities. And when you do that, then you get these outcomes that a person finds empowering. But a ballpark, let's take 10 people living with overweight. They all get cognitive behavior therapy. And it's kind of like, it's like a medication you give it just sort of in a general way affects everybody, but it doesn't target anything specifically. So it is not as, the outcome isn't as powerful.
How much of a role does PTSD have in the reenactment?
You don't have to have PTSD to have reenactments. We all have reenactments, all of us, every day. We don't know it. We're not aware. We're clueless. We're not tracking these things. We track things like, you see a fight, we track an argument, we track, how people behave in a meeting. These are the things we look at, but we just look at the surface. It's a bit like, did you ever take English Lit? Where, you're reading Thomas Hardy, 40 pages of the woods, and it's like, Jesus, what the hell is going on? And what's the plot? There's no plot. What are the themes? Oh, all right. This is loneliness. This is isolation. This is, there are themes in that description. And so this is the thing in any moment in everyday life. There's something that happens, and then there are themes that trigger. And that's what this is about, is figuring those themes and then targeting those themes.
For
So
s-
people who don't have PTSD will have themes as well. It might not be as intense, but they still are determined and defined by themes.
for someone who feels stuck but they don't know where to start, what's one small thing they can do that's the most powerful first step?
Well, every meeting, every AA meeting starts with, "Hi, my name is John, Tom, whatever. I have a drinking problem." And they start that way because it's owning right away the problem. And so this is the same kind of idea. The small step they can do is own that they feel a certain way. All right. And validate that. But it might be hard for them, given their life experiences, to validate those experiences and themes. So the idea is, I have this problem, and I need to work on this. So it starts there, and then you have a chance. And I should tell you, when sometimes with certain patients or certain people, it's hard to, like, they're so concrete. Everything in life is this sort of A to B, B to C, and meanwhile, they're not into symbolism, they're not into themes, they're not into those things. They're just into, a practical form of thinking. But even them get affected, in terms of these themes. So it's any strategy that allows the awareness to open up and to own, what is going on with oneself. If I had to ask, I think you've dealt, with a history of depression, or is that right? And
Mhm.
so when did things change for you? And how did it change?
I would say for me, the moment that it changed was therapy.
Okay. What was the moment that took you to therapy?
I remember I think it's been about 4 years now. I had got diagnosed with anxiety 5 years ago. And one of the major things that I had happen to me was a huge shift in how I had to live life. And it kind of got to the point where I thought, I can't live like this anymore. I need to go to therapy. And so I took the first steps to go into therapy, and it helped tremendously at first. Um, but it wasn't until really after I went to a psychiatrist that she got me on some really good medicine for me. That's when it finally kind of started taking effect and I started going down the right path and things started looking up. So it started out with therapy, but then it was the psychiatrist who really, really helped.
So the interventions made you think this is when it started, but it started before the interventions. It started, where you came to this crossroad. I can't keep doing this. This is the rock bottom, and it's either you do something or it's over, and so the let me do something, and that's what you figured out. That's a natural thing, in terms of when things are that bad, you go see a therapist, and that is the opening. That is the opening, and it led to other things, and it was great that on top of all your work, that pharmacotherapy helped you. Sometimes people, in that situation, the pharmacotherapy doesn't help them a lot or enough, and so they have to keep figuring, keep doing things to try to find the medium that they're most comfortable with, that allows them to attack this as hard as they need to. So yeah, no, so that's a good example. That's a good example.
As I mentioned earlier, you were the author of a book that you had come out with, the reenactments break the behavior patterns that keep you stuck in trauma, stress, and everyday life. Tell me a little bit about how this book came to be, and what's the main takeaway you'd like readers to um, get from when they read this book?
Yeah, so I kind of touched on this, early on, that it first started with working with trauma cases, veterans, and then I did a lot of work with collision, with accidents that people got involved in, and then I started to see people in the medical context with medical traumas, having a breast removed, or a leg being amputated, or so they were all confronted with things that markedly affected them, and again, it seemed like the obvious thing was to deal with the surface, but it really wasn't getting at what the issue is, and so this went on for years, and gradually we refined this pattern, this process. We do it one-on-one, we do it with groups, it's a powerful approach to things. I think the take home is when people seem to get the idea that it's the themes that trigger them, then they have something that makes sense to them. It because the way we do it, Noah, is, let's say, um, pick a theme you're sensitive to. Could you give me one?
Hmm, I can't think of one off the top of my head.
Okay, I'll give one. You prefer that?
Yep.
Okay. I I'm a rescuer. That's a role that I have. And I had that role, and it started very early. My job was to take care of my mom, who wasn't well. And so all my life was about trying to make her happy. And then I continued on and tried to rescue other people. What kind of work do I do? A psychologist, a therapist. What do we do? We rescue. But all of this is like not conscious. All of this is not intentional, thought out, and so, in my older age, because I'm more aware, I'm more careful, and I don't put myself in situations of always having to rescue, because then you're just carrying people, and that's not good, and I think you know this, you can't have everything go out and nothing come back. Something has to come back. There has to be a balance in relationships, and if your job is always to give, then we're going to have a problem in terms of feeling not seen or heard or valued or any of those things, so it's those themes. It and so when this gets triggered in the present, what I would do is, oh, this is my rescuer theme. So let me go back. Who did I rescue? Okay, I got kids, I got a partner, you know, rescued people along the way, friends, and so this is a role that I had. So you go into your history and whatever you're sensitive to. If you're sensitive to loss, then you can look back at your history and go, there was a loss here, there was a loss here, and there was a loss here. If you're sensitive to abandonment, you know, you can go all the way back to when you were a kid, and the parents would leave you for the weekend, when they went on a bender, and you were left to your own devices. So there'll be abandonment. Or you go all the way back to your dad left home, when you were 3 and never was heard from again. And that might be experienced as abandonment. So these themes, it's never one moment, Noah. It's many, many moments. And that's what sensitizes you to those themes in everyday life. That's the trauma. The trauma is the themes. The trigger is the theme. It doesn't have to be traumatic, though. Okay. But loss, abandonment, safety, these are all themes that people have. But their past experiences will determine what they're sensitive to. And sometimes you can have two people who are sensitive to the same theme of abandonment, but what they respond to are, what led to the abandonment are different. If you're giving up, to children, if you're giving up to children's aid, that's a different sort of origin of that theme of abandonment than if, your parents were there but just never paid attention to you. Both will feel abandonment, but will have different versions as to what contributed to that experience. So it's the themes that are. So I think that's the traumas, the events. This is in the literature. This is out in the world. But looking at these themes, this is a little less well known, and so I think that's what we're trying to bring attention to.
What do you hope readers and listeners that are listening to this episode, and whether they read from it, what's one key takeaway that you would like people to know about reenactments?
Once you figure this out, you have to understand that this is a lifetime proposition. This is not 10 sessions and you're cool and you're good. It's not. This is, you get better, you deal with things better. Sometimes you get so much better where you can predict. You can have a meeting with someone and this is going to get triggered. And then you have a plan to defend when that gets triggered. All right. That's even before it happens. This is when you get really skilled. This is a bit of a different message than what you hear sometimes out in the world. You can heal. You can transcend. There are these big words, and it's like everybody's trying to reach this peak moment, like happiness. You try to hit the peak moment. What happens when you hit the peak moment? The next day, it starts all over again. You have to deal with life. It doesn't change. So getting the MVP award or getting an acting award, or it's a great moment, it's a peak moment, but life continues and you have to deal with all the challenges of life. So in this respect, this approach is life oriented. It's a recognition that it never ends, but you can be better with yourself, have a better life, make the world a bit better as well, and be more at peace with yourself and 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 treat yourself better. Life's hard enough as it is. What we don't need to do is make the same mistakes. And that inner critic, we don't need that inner critic just ragging on us and giving us a hard time. You're stupid, you're ugly, you're this, you're that. And this is a hard life. And so the take-home message is, focusing on these reenactment themes, breaking them, changing your behavior, and going forward for the rest of your life, maintaining this approach. So it's not a quick
What
fix.
what advice do you have for people that maybe if they do suffer from these reenactments, what's some of the best advice you can give them of how they can appropriately deal with reenactments and how to help lower the reoccurrence of them?
Yeah, no, I think, you first work on the awareness and whatever strategies that allows you to notice the difficulties you have. Um, then the idea is to pay attention to this and to try to start to do something with it, something different. There's no point in doing the same thing. And so you do something different, and then you see how it goes, and is it, next time, should I do it this way? Should I do it this other way? Next time, should I prepare in this manner? And then you keep refining your process and improving your skills and empowering yourself. So it really comes from first just being aware, that something's wrong, that needs to be addressed. You can't approach what scares you. I should say, Noah, all of behavior can be broken down into two groups of behaviors. You avoid or you approach. All right. Most people avoid. That's just human behavior, human nature. We avoid the hard moments if we can. That's our first choice. The problem with avoiding, Noah, is whatever you avoid today is there tomorrow waiting for you and the day after. And it gets harder the more you put it off. If you approach the problem, then you have a chance at doing something. And people who approach, the next day is better, or the day after that is better. But it all comes from approaching. So you had a moment, where you kind of felt at a crossroads, and then someone told you, or you thought it yourself, you went and sought help. That's approach. It takes courage to have the guts to go to see a stranger, expose yourself, and try to deal with, the core, the nature, the deep hurts that a person has. And then it led to seeing a psychiatrist, and then it led to all those are approach behaviors. Noah, if you hadn't done that, where would you be today?
It's a good question. Probably, honestly, not here.
Yeah, not good. That's right. Not good. So it came from approach. And I think if you look back, you will notice before you approached, there was some avoidance. There were some things you were avoiding and you weren't dealing with. And it kept happening again and again, the hurts. And and then it became too much. And then you saved yourself. That's what you did. All right. They helped, but you saved yourself by making that approach. If you hadn't done that, it likely would be a different story. So approach this area, approach the topic, approach your life, approach how you feel, and try to examine what the hell, this is a fourth relationship that just blew up after a year. What am I doing wrong? Not what are they doing wrong? What am I doing wrong? So that's the other thing too, is you got to take responsibility for your life, for yourself. All right. That's the empowerment. Looking for someone else to fix this is not going to work because you never learn how to how to take care of yourself. So it's the old adage, someone is hungry, give him some fish, that's nice, but teach them how to fish, and this is the idea. Teach a person to look at this, make the changes, make the approaches, and have different outcomes in their lives.
If people have questions about reenactments and they want to learn more about maybe how to, I guess, deal with reenactments and how they can help lower that, what's some best ways that they can get in touch with you? And maybe if they would like to also check the book out, where they can find the book
Sure,
as well.
sure. The my website at Tony Tony Iezzi Iezzi.com. And on that website, you'll have, all kinds of materials, the book, there are videos, there are blogs, in terms of this, and we are trying to provide lots of information in terms of reenactments. Of course, buying the book would be the other ticket. And I think I think the website or the book is the best way to start, but if you start with the book first, then you have a website to go and access materials, to access other people in terms of what they think. And yeah, or if you go to the website first, then it can give you an idea whether this is for you. Okay. So for example, even in the book, I say this: if you're looking for a quick fix, this book's not for you. If you don't want to do all the work, well, how many years have you been working at this for you?
4 years.
4 years. All right. It's just the start, right? It's
Hmm.
just the start. You there? Have you reached that point? Everything's cool?
For the most part, yeah, but it's
Okay.
still a
It is okay.
work in progress every day.
Correct. Correct. Then the question becomes, how do you work that progress every day? And I think this is what this book, tries to do is it kind of gives you an idea of how to do it, and I'm going to say it's pretty different than from a lot of other books you have out there, in terms of how to do that. There's a lot of stuff on trauma work. There's a lot of stuff on the treatment of depression, but that's the thing. The book has a lot of suggestions, and there's a recognition there isn't one right way to do this. There's so many ways. You just got to find yours, the one that works best for you. And to do that, you got to fumble around, some trial and error, and, if you hadn't gone on to the next phase and stopped after therapy, you would not have done as well. You know, it led to then going on. And so you might do therapy after medication. You might go back, in 5 years for another trial of medication, like there are many, it depends on so many things. Or you can work hard at protecting yourself better. You can work hard at asserting yourself, finding your voice, saying what it is you want from people. And when that starts to work, you start to get the reinforcement, the rewards, and that starts to lead to a little more confidence, a little more self-esteem. And if you have that, it allows you to take a bit more risk. And if your relationships improve as a result, if you feel more at peace with yourself, the podcasts, this is another godsend for you, I imagine. It's an activity that is therapeutic for you. This task, gives you a purpose, gives you value, and if you can continue that into the future, you know, you will be building on becoming a stronger, person, and a person more at peace with himself.
Well, Dr. Tony, I appreciate you so much for coming on to the show today and sharing this message with my audience. I think it's something that I actually had never heard of reenactments before this, so this was actually a really good insight about what those are. I've definitely have experienced these, and I didn't even know what it was. And I appreciate you so much for coming on here and sharing this with
Sure.
me. It was
Good.
a great conversation. I appreciate it so much.
Great. Thanks. Nice meeting you.
I'll put off his links in the description box below, as well as his social media and website. Feel free to follow me on social media as well at Instagram and TikTok, Lethal Venom Podcast for those, and as well as Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Noah's Podcast. Feel free to follow the podcast wherever you get podcasts from: Spotify, Apple, Amazon, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Pandora, or some of the major platforms I'm on. I'm also on other platforms, so feel free to follow the podcast wherever you get your show podcast from, to where you get notified new episodes come out. I appreciate you all so much for listening to today's episode. Hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all in the next episode of Lethal Venom.